Today, the central bank is leading another multi-billion naira engagement to support the Nigerian police in the wake of protests that resulted in deadly assaults on police officers and facilities in Lagos and a few other locations across Nigeria. So let's put this into police funding into conversation as we turn now to Muda Yusuf, who is the Director General at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Good evening, sir. It's good to have you on the program.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. So the private sector initiative called CACOVID has expanded their interventions into the police, beyond the virus to include the police and lending to the private sector. What's your take on this?
I believe it's a great idea because no business can function in an environment that is not secure. So apart from being a great CSR initiative, it's also something that is in the enlightened self-interest of investors to support the police. Because what happened with the NSAS completely degraded the police force. We could see almost a total loss of confidence in the police. And since then, even the visibility of the police in the major cities have declined sharply. And you know what it is when you move around and you don't even see policemen around. Because the visibility of the police is part of the things that gives citizens confidence that you are in an environment that is secure and that is safe. But if you now have a situation where the police have their confidence badly shaken, they appear to have been decimated seriously. Some of them are not even confidently put on their uniforms. It's a very, very dangerous situation to be. 2 weeks ago, just around the former toll gate here in Ikeja, some hoodlums barricaded the road, the express road, around 8 p.m. And they were armed with cutlasses, they were smashing windscreens and all of that. They did that around between 7:30 and 8. I had somebody very close to me who narrowly escaped being hurt by the cutlass. So it's as bad as that. And we have had reports of this kind of things, and it's affecting even the confidence of citizens. Citizens are no longer feeling secure. So we need to restore the confidence of the police. And one of the things that this intervention will do is to bring back that confidence of the police by supporting them. And society also needs to show that we care for them because every life matters. Of course, we need to worry about the victims of the Lekki shootings and all of that, but we also need to worry about the policemen that were killed. Some of them were burnt alive. They are also human beings. So the society also needs to be fair to them. Of course, there are bad acts among them, there are issues, and we have to deal with all of these things together in a holistic manner because we cannot do without the police.
So how critical is the police security in Nigeria's quest to achieve economic security? Because national security is economic security.
You know, the responsibility for internal security is basically that of the police. So if we don't have a strong, well-equipped, confident police force, then you cannot have investors' confidence. Because no matter how good the environment are economically, no matter how sound the market opportunities are, no matter how sound the macroeconomic environment is, if your life as an investor is not safe, then it's not a good destination for investment. Whether you are talking of domestic investment or foreign investment. We hardly talk about security because we take it for granted. And we have taken it for granted for a long time. But the NSAS event was a turning point that we cannot just take issues of security for granted anymore.
So, Mr. Yusuf, Yusuf, now we have the private sector coming together under this big umbrella of the central bank with the bankers committee, with big organizations such as the Dangote Foundation and the rest of them. Do you think this can make a real difference this time around, now that the private sector have seen that, look, if you don't have the internal security, the whole conversation about economic renaissance, whether it's a recession or whatever, we're just pouring water into the basket?
Of course. It will make a whole lot of difference. First, the kind of budget they are talking about is quite a robust amount of money, which I think will make a whole lot of difference. And the response time and all of that in disbursing the money, in making it available, is not operating within the context of any heavy bureaucracy. So these things can be done and done very quickly. Unlike what you have with the budgetary process, where you have to go through all sorts of hurdles before you make the funds available. This is straight and it can be delivered very fast. So I think it's going to make a whole lot of difference in terms of the speed, in terms of the effectiveness of the delivery, in terms of cost efficiency and all of that. It will make a whole lot of difference. And we must also commend the role of the CBN in this, and of course the bankers committee and all other private sector players, at least for coming around to put this kind of initiative on the table. Is something that is very commendable.
So what about plans by Kakovid Group to launch a high-impact youth development program for technical and vocational education? You think this is, yes, supporting the police on one hand in terms of clothing, facility and all of that. Then, of course, in terms of creating jobs for the youth. Muda Yusuf, Director General at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We'll take a break. Keep that question in mind. We'll talk about that and more when we come back. Nigeria's Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment says a new national investment policy document has been put together and is expected to be ready before the end of the first quarter. This was as the Nigerian authorities are working on plans to reopen the country's land borders shut since August 2019. The Director or General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Muda Yusuf, is still with us on the show to speak to this and where we left off on the police funding and the plans by Kakovid to include youth vocational training and education under the new arrangement. This is taking the bull by the horn, isn't it, Mr. Yusuf?
Yes, it is. Because one of the challenges we have with issues of unemployment is the mismatch between our academic curriculum and the needs of industry or the needs of the economy itself. The economic landscape has been changing. It's a very dynamic landscape. But most times, the academic curriculum has been static. We have curriculum of schools that have been there for over 20 years. So this mismatch, of course, necessitates or makes it necessary to have this kind of intervention. But more importantly is to look at how we deal with the systemic issue of the educational system itself, so that you have an educational system that supports the economic properly, that identifies the gaps, and an educational system whose curriculum is also dynamic, that also changes as things change in the economy. So we should have that systemic approach to the educational system and aligning the educational system curriculum to the needs of the economy. I think that is a more lasting and enduring thing or intervention that I'd like to see. But what the Kakovid have done, I think is a good thing.
The whole idea of vocational training and education is to ensure that the country's industrialization moves further. So when the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment says they're putting together a new national investment policy document for Nigeria, what do you think should be the centerpiece of this policy and the role of those of you in the private sector?
Well, the centerpiece is to create an economy or an environment, policy environment particularly, regulatory environment, institutional environment, that makes investment competitive in Nigeria. I think that should be the central theme. Now we have just ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are now going to face more rigorous or more intense competitive environment. And if we continue to operate the way we are operating, with all the hurdles on the way of investors, with all the difficult operating environments, with all the challenges that we are facing at the ports and the customs and all of that, there is no way we can compete with some of these companies coming from other parts of Africa, because they have much better environment. Their regulatory environment is much better. Their institutional environment is much better than what we have. So this is the time to quickly look at the entire spectrum of investment policy and see what we can do to make sure that all the investment that we have there are competitive. Because this is no longer a time where we can rely only on the domestic market. We should be looking at the international competitiveness of our firms. I should also be looking at how we support indigenous investors. Because what we find is that sometimes the indigenous investors are at a very great disadvantage. Because those who come from abroad, from some of these countries, they have a lot of support from their own government. But here we are, our own indigenous businesses can sometimes hardly compete with them because of the kind of support that they have from their own country.
Okay, so how do we support? So one of the ways in which we're talking about investment policy is the land borders that the government is planning to reopen. How do you think this process should be handled and why?
Well, what is important with regard to the land border is to ensure that we have institutional effectiveness, because that was the major problem in the first place. If institutions were very strong, particularly institutions who are managing the border policing and border management, those institutions have to be more effective. They should be less compromising in their duties. If you have that one, if people know that there are consequences for not doing their job, I think that will make a whole lot of difference. Because when institutions are weak, a lot of things fall apart. And you now take decisions that will now be inflicting pains on the citizens, which is not a fair thing. So government has a responsibility to ensure that those institutions are effective. And we also need to look at the whole gamut of our trade policy. Because if your trade policy is also defective, it creates a lot of pressure.
Muda Yusuf, the Director General at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we thank you for your time this evening. Thank you so much and see you some other time.